Utility voice memos. All right, so who got that reading done that we did the first night? All right, it wasn't a lot, right? I mean, honestly, it'd take you quicker, because that doesn't make sense. It would be quicker to, use a bathroom than read what we had to read, right? So the value of truth. Now, you see what I'm talking about when they start talking about truth in this particular text, and I didn't even bother with any of the things we've talked about the theories of truth, or like what makes sense as opposed to what doesn't make sense, all that stuff. Did you see that? Did you notice that? All right, so what was he talking about for the most part in your author's book right there? What was he talking about? What were those pages? Pages 223 to 228. What were the 2 points that he wanted to bring up in that? Does anybody remember? You guys are terrible. What was it? The hedonist challenge and what? Or maybe not challenge, but the hedonistic principle, and then what else?
Rational principle.
Right. So he was asking the question here, the value of truth, right? So what, and basically this is just kind of a wrap up of what we talked about Thursday? Because we're supposed to talk about logic today already, but we want to go ahead and wrap up some of this just because the book mentions this, so we're going to talk about it a little bit too, right? So what is the value of truth? Is truth valuable, or does anybody remember what does he say the hedonist principle is in regards to truth? Go ahead, Piper.
That if you can't find value in truth, then it's not worth knowing.
Could have been a better color.
I gave you the one I didn't like.
That's true. So he has something up here called the hedonist principle, right? So what did you say, Piper? I ran out of room. Just plan ahead.
That unless you can find value in the truth personally, then you need not worry about it.
Or what's the point of it? Like, can this work for me, or does this provide pleasure for me, or how does this benefit me in some way, right? Something like that. So what's the rational principle? Is that what he calls it in this book? In this text, he calls it, I think so. Yeah, he calls the rational principle. Now, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because when I don't even know, I mean, I guess I can see why you would put this in your text, but, and I mean, we'll talk about it. Anyway, so this is all about what can the truth do for me? Does this bring me pleasure? What's the best thing in regards to trying to find the truth? You know, if it can bring me pleasure, if it can benefit me somewhat. This is knowing the truth for its own sake, right? So this rationalist principle is, you know the truth why, or you should try to find the truth why, because it's intrinsically valuable, right? That is just to say that the truth is valuable for its own sake. It's worth pursuing as its own end, right? For its own end. For its own end. The rational principle. Now, the reason we're not going to spend a lot of time with this, because you remember we talked about the first principles of all thought. What were those when we talked about that? What are the first principles of all thought, of reality, so to speak? Law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle, and what? Right, law of identity, right? Those are basically the fundamental principles of all thought, right? Why? Because you have to assume those, right? What? To use them, right? So you can't literally do anything without what being in effect. Those principles, right? So did we talk about, did Aristotle invent those? No, what did he do? Right, he discovers them, right? And again, can you prove those philosophically in the sense of, say, you go through some sort of argument and then arrive at a conclusion? Can you prove them? No, you can't prove them. Why? Why can you not prove them? Because remember, you have to use them, right? In order for an argument to work, what do you have to already assume works? Or what do you have to already assume for any argument to get off the ground? Those principles, right? Because when I say, I will give you an argument, what am I assuming right then when I say that? The law of non-contradiction, right? Because when I say I'm going to give you an argument, I'm not saying at the same time, in the same way, in the same sense, what? I'm not going to give you an argument, right? So when I say I'm going to give you an argument, I'm already using the law of non-contradiction. So I can't prove it because I'm already using it, right? Now, the benefit of that is, can you disprove them? You can't disprove them. Why? Because what do you have to do? You have to use them, right? Again, even the guy that says, I'm going to disprove the laws of logic. What does he just use? It just used the first fundamental principles of logic, namely the law of non-contradiction, right? Just use them. So you can't disprove them because you have to use them. So if you can't, quote unquote, prove them and you can't disprove them, what do we call those types of principles? What are those? They're foundational, right? They're axiomatic, right? They're the building blocks or the fundamental principles of how we even think, how we do anything in regards to reality, right? So what do we call those? If you can't prove them philosophically, it's in some sort of logical fashion because you're already having to use them, then what do we call those types of things? They're just self-evident, right? So we would say that the law of logic, or the laws of logic, those three basic principles are just self-evident. What does that mean to say they're self-evident? Think about it. What does self mean? What does evident mean? They just provide evidence, what? Unto themselves, right? Meaning that in order to even talk about them, they give evidence unto themselves, right? So that's what it means. Now, we talked about when we said all of those self-defeating statements, right? There is no truth. Well, if that's true, then there's truth. All that stuff, right? Well, the reason we're not going to spend a lot of time on this right here is because this right here, this hedonistic principle, is in one way, is going to come, if not directly, it's going to be at least indirectly in violation of, or it's going to have to trade off of this principle. How so? Think about it. How so? Go ahead.
So it would be the hedonistic principle would be like it assumes that truth is valuable. It's like it's valuable to you.
Well, for instance, if you were to ask me which one of these principles is true, that's reality, right? Or what's the value of truth? Do you want me to give you the true answer? Or do you want me to give you the what? The pleasurable answer. You see what I'm saying? If the value of truth is all about what brings you pleasure, this is the only reason to pursue truth because it brings me pleasure. Well, one, that itself would have to be true, what? Regardless if it what? Brought you pleasure or not, right? Like that system of truth would have to be true even if it didn't bring you pleasure, right? But in other words, or in another way, if we're talking about it, if you're saying like, which one of these should we follow? I would have to give you the true answer as opposed to just the pleasurable answer, right? So at that moment, you're actually willing to know this principle, even if you're trying to justify this principle or this particular reason, right? How so? If you're sitting thinking about it, if you're sitting around thinking, should I value truth for its own sake, or should I value truth just for the pleasure it brings me? What are you doing in the question? Right then, what are you doing?
You're admitting that the truth has intrinsic value.
Right. You're just trying to come to what? The true conclusion, not necessarily what? The pleasurable one. The one that brings you the whatever else, You're sitting there trying to come to the true conclusion. So we're not going to talk about this a whole lot, right? Now, let's reflect back to just do kind of a quick recap of what we talked about last week, or last Thursday, rather. What was probably the most interesting thing that we talked about in regards to all of those theories of truth, how it worked, or how those principles work, that kind of stuff? What was probably one of the most interesting things? Or did you even get to apply that? Did you try to go home and apply it or think about it? Did any of you have your brains rattled by that? It was that stimulating, huh? It blew your mind. That it was so hardcore. I like about it. What do you not like about it?
It's confusing.
Why is it confusing?
Because you're saying truth too many times.
Why is it confusing? I'm gonna tell you my theory real quickly. You want to hear my theory as to why it's confusing? Because public education is a joke. I honestly think that. I mean, like, it's just unbelievable to me that there's not like, in public schools, you don't take any critical thinking classes. You don't take any philosophy classes. You don't take any logic classes. You're not taught how to think in any shape, form, or fashion in a public school at all.
Try growing up in a Christian school.
Well, some of those, like Piper back here, they took philosophy classes in this schools. And what's funny, the funny thing is that when I get online and try to find schools that teach any sort of logic and philosophy, it's almost always those private schools, which is kind of a funny thing, that public schools don't even bother, right? And then public schools are always telling you to what? Think for yourself and, be your own person and blah, 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 blah. But then we don't even understand what basic theories of what? Truth. Or we don't even understand the first, what? Principles of logic. Just the law of identity, law of excluding middle, law of non-contradiction. Which is why I think you can go through school, the American school system, K through 12, and literally believe stuff like when somebody says there is no truth, right? Or truth is just perspective. That's why you have 30-year-olds, even with college degrees, sitting there watching their television, seeing that kind of stuff and believing it. Because they don't know anything about thinking, right? Because what if someone says, I don't want to tell you what to think, I want to teach you how to think? What if someone tells you that? I don't want to tell you what to think. I want you to think for yourself. I want to teach you how to think. Think about that. Well, if they want to say, I don't want to tell you what to think, I want to teach you how to think, don't they at least have to tell you what to think in order to how to think? I mean, yeah, it's just why. Like, so for instance, like if I want to teach you how to think, right? I want to do that in this class. Like, I want you to be able to go through this class, and at the end of this intro to philosophy class, I want you to at least have some sort of, I want you to have tools to be able to have to think for yourself, right? But at the same time, I'm going to tell you what to think in the sense of if you're violating what? I want you to use these. Why? Because I like them. What are these first? Right. Law of excluding middle. All of it. So I want to teach you to use these. Why? I'm going to say, I want to tell you what to think in the sense of use these principles. Why? Because I want you to be able to what? Right, to think for yourself. But to say stupid stuff like just think for yourself completely is dumb. Why? Why is it dumb just to say that complete as a rule in and of itself? Because what if you don't know how to think? What if I just told, I was like, I want you to build your own house. Look, man, this is America. We got radical autonomy. Go build your own house, but you don't know jack about building a house. What's going to happen? You're going to be sitting there taking a dump one day and your roof cave in on you, right? Because you don't know what you're doing. So I want you to be able to think right for yourself. But here, think for yourself. Here's some tools, right? So in the same way, if I want you to one day build your own house and do your own thing, I still want to what? Show you how to do it. Now you go do it. You know how to do it now. Now you go do it, right? But we live, in an American society where we value not just autonomy, which is, seems to be good, but radical autonomy, radical individualism, right? That's why we can say stuff when we were talking about our brief little interlude on ethical theories before we get to that. That's why we were saying, stuff will work like Oh, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt anyone else. What does that even mean? We've talked about that, right? That's just radical autonomy. That's radical individualism, right? Is it good to be an individual? Sure, right, yeah. No question. But in a radical sense, again, because one, we live in a society, right? You don't live on an island, you don't live by yourself. Whatever you do affects people. So anyway, we're using these principles. We're talking about these principles because right off the bat, we get in our book where he skipped all of that stuff, right? And I want you to be able to see how these principles already affect the very first thing he's talking about in his book, right? Because there's some good stuff in this book, but at the same time, there's some stuff that I think is pretty biased in the sense of, it's honestly like he hasn't, and I know this sounds bad, but it's almost like he hasn't even read like the latest literature in a lot of the philosophical areas that he's talking about. And so I want to make sure that you can see that. Now, what we're going to talk about first and foremost, because we are Jatavia, right? Jatavia. We're going to go ahead and talk about, I want you to see how some of these principles will affect your life immediately on the biggest questions. Because right now, at this point, I'm still trying to trap you into enjoying this class, right? I'm still trying to convince you that you should like this. That's obviously what I'm trying to do still. Now, I want us to see how this is applicable. Is it applicable or applicable? Is it Caribbean or Caribbean? Caribbean or Caribbean? I don't know. All right, so is it tomato or tomato? All right, here's the thing. Does anybody say tomato? Anybody? It's like tomato or tomato. Like, nobody says tomato. Quit using that example. Use the Caribbean. All right, so what are we talking about? All right, religious truths. All right. Or I shouldn't say truth, let's put claims. Religious claims. And I'm not marking out truth because I don't think there's any religious truth. I'm just saying that all of these can't be truths because that doesn't make sense, right? Something contradicts something else and they can't both be true, right? So we're just going to use, say, the law of non-contradiction, law of excluding middle, and law of identity. Now we're going to look at some of these in light of some of these. So why do you think I'm already going towards this? Why do you think I'm already going there? In regards to what we talked about last week. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, for some people, this, like, what they believe in terms of if there's a God, if there's not a God, if we can't know, like, that determines their morality, that determines, like, their decisions, the way of thinking. Like, it's very influential. Sure,
but everybody has that, right? Everybody's got a worldview, right?
Yeah.
Whatever your view is, you're going to do what with it? It's going to determine how you act and how you behave and how you live and how you vote and how you whatever else, right? Everybody's got that, not just religious people.
Oh, yeah.
But what we want to do is look at how these apply to, again, because we live in our society, what's very popular right now? Radical autonomy, right? Radical individualism, which bleeds over into every aspect of society, but bleeds over into what, too? Right. So we've become a society that, because of our radical individualism, because of our radical autonomy, wants to say things like, what? You can believe what? Whatever you want to believe, right? Now, as we kind of talked about, like, in one sense of the word, can you believe whatever you want to believe? Right. If you want to believe that you're a moonbat, you can believe that, right? But the question is it true, right? And does it make sense? So, for instance, let's look at atheism right here. Atheism would say we're looking at this principle right here, law of excluded middle. What does atheism say roughly? What's the Greek for atheism? What does that mean? Is the prefix for like a negation, right? So theism. This is a negation. So what does that mean? I should have done it like this. So what does that mean? It means there's no God, right? There's not one. So that would be atheism, right? So if atheism says there's no God. And theism says what? Says what? There is a God. What is the law of excluded middle? How does the law of excluded middle relate to these two positions? And right now we can even count this as our intro to logic too. So how does this principle relate to these two positions? Remember, think common sense right here. Remember, we're doing the philosophy of common sense. What you already think, but the tools behind that. The law of excluded middle just says what? There's just no in between. Either, this is the law of excluded middle. Either / or. That's the law of excluded middle in a rough summation of it. Either what?
There is a God.
Either there is a God or what? Or there's not. Now you see why that's called the law of excluded middle? There's no middle ground there. There's either a God or there's not a God. Does that make sense? There's not a quasi-God, right? There's not a semi-God, whatever that, there's either a God or there's not a God, right? That's just the law of excluded middle. So right here, right off the bat, if theism is true, then what is this? This is false. What if you really believe this? Who gives a crap? If this is true, this is false. Why? Because that's what we like, or what? It's just law of excluded middle and law of non-contradiction, right? Because if atheism is false, then atheism is what? Not true, right? Can't be true at the same time, in the same way, in the same sense, according to what? The law of non-contradiction, right? Well, see how these are all basically saying the same thing, but from different angles? Law of non-contradiction. If atheism is true, then atheism can't be false, right? And if atheism is false, then atheism can't be true. Why? Law of non-contradiction and law of excluded middle. Either atheism is true or atheism is what? False. Same thing with theism. If atheism is true, then what is theism? False, right? Whether you like it or not. So you can't say something like, well, for me, God exists, but for you, God doesn't exist. Why? Because if God exists, then what? It can't be the case that what? God doesn't exist at the same time, in the same way, in the same sense, because of what? The law of non-contradiction. And, right? And when we say God, so for instance, right here, law of identity, when we say God, we mean what? Volkswagen, right? No, when we say God, we mean God, right? Whatever something is whatever it is, what? It is that, right? You're not talking about something else. So a lot of times people will try to say, oh, well, when you mean God, I mean this over here. All right, but we're talking about this. Either, let's pull these together, either God exists or God doesn't exist. So law of identity, either God exists or God doesn't exist. That's just, you're talking about what you're talking about, right? Does that make sense? This one will become more clear the further we go. Hopefully these two are already just clear, right? Law of non-contradiction says what? Something can't be true and false at the same way, in the same time, in the same sense, right? Law of excluded middle is what? Either or. Either this position is true, which will make the other false, or this position is false, which will make the other true, right? Something like that. You only have two options in that, right? Everything is going to boil down to this. Even positions that seem like, well, no, there's a middle ground here, because it's either going to be the middle ground or what? Not middle ground, right? All right, so enough with atheism, theism right here. Now let's look at these on these other faith systems. And again, why are we doing this? Why are we already looking at these in regards to religious claims? One, because I'm still trying to what? Get you interested in the course, right? So what does everybody have a stake in usually? This kind of stuff, right? So, and because we're all Americans, right? So we're all think that we have this entitlement to what? believe whatever we want to believe, which in one sense is true, right? Is it true in one sense? Right, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but in another sense, why is it not true? Because,
Somebody's wrong.
right, somebody's wrong. Now, that's the kind of thing that, again, is not popular on college campuses, that you can kind of talk about wherever else, but in our society, in the media, and college campuses, it's just not, you can't say that kind of stuff. You can't say somebody's wrong, right? Well, why can't I? And I'm talking about logic, and everything that I'm talking about is going to just by what? Necessity, say that somebody's wrong. That's just the nature of what? Right, life. And what we talked about last week, what? Reality. That's just reality. I'm sorry if you don't like it. Sorry if this offends you. Like what? Reality just doesn't care about what? It just doesn't. It just doesn't, right? And like we talked about again, about last week with truth, theory of truth, like this, the truth is truth determined by belief or sincerity of belief. No, it's just not. Again, because here's the thing, you bump into reality, right? You have to deal with reality on its terms, right? We can't change reality, ultimately speaking, because of the sincerity of our belief. What was our example? Cut your brake pads or whatever, that kind of stuff. Or let's say that you sincerely believe that you can fly, and you climb up the Eiffel Tower and you jump off. Does gravity give a crap about the sincerity of your belief when you jump off the Eiffel Tower? No. But what do we want to do all of a sudden? So when we talk about any other topic, we realize that reality, based off these principles, is pretty harsh, right? But what do we want to do all of a sudden here? Oh, they don't apply to religious or spiritual type claims. Why? How does that make any sense? In fact, they have to apply to this, because when you say God, what are you using? The law of identity. You're not talking about tomato, right? So you can't say, well, the principles of thought don't talk about, you can't use these when you talk about God. So if someone says God is love, they don't mean what? Someone said, I believe God is love, and so we can't talk about the laws of logic. God is love. So for instance, God is love. Oh, so God is hate. No, God is love. God is hate. No, God is, you see what I'm saying? What are they using? They're using the law of non-contradiction to make what? Claims about what? About God, right? If these principles don't apply to spiritual aspects, then what can you not do? You can't even talk about spiritual things. Why? Because, as we've said 100,000 times already, why? You have to use these in order to what? To make any sort of statement at all. To make any sort of truth claim, you have to use the law of non-contradiction. Why? They're self-evident. You can't get around them. Anything you say, anything you think about, anything you do, you're going to employ what? We've talked about it. These every day in every topic in every shape, form, and fashion, right? So when you make the statement, let's say it like this: laws of logic don't apply to spiritual topics. Spiritual topics. What have I just done? Laws of logic don't apply to spiritual topics. What have I just done? I just used the laws of logic to talk about spiritual topics, right? I just did it. The laws of logic don't apply to spiritual topics. Oh, so the laws of logic do apply to spiritual topics? I just used what? Law of non-contradiction. I just used what? Law of excluded middle. How? How did I use this one? Because either the laws of logic apply to spiritual topics or they don't apply to spiritual. Should I just use that? Law of identity. Oh, so you're talking about Sperry topsiders. No, I'm talking about spiritual topics. No, you're talking about Sperry topsiders. No, I'm talking about spiritual topics. Well, all right, you literally just use every single one of these in this statement. Again, why? Because this is just the fundamental way you have to think, whether you like it or not. This is just the way we do what? Life. It's just the way we think. It's just the way we construct our sentences. It's just the way we make any meaningful statements. All right, so what if someone says, well, nothing is meaningful? There you go, law of non-contradiction. Nothing's meaningful. Well, did you mean that? Because if you meant that, then something's meaningful. But if you didn't mean that, then even that's not meaningful. So if it's not meaningful, why am I listening to it? Right? But you meant that. So again, you're having to use these. Again, you cannot get around these. You can't get around them. Why? Fundamental, axiomatic, basic principles of reality, right? Not just the way we think, which is true, but reality. Like this is, whatever this thing is, this podium thing, it is what? It. That's right. Whatever this is. Now, can I not know what it is? Is that possible? Yeah, that's possible. But even if I don't know, it still is what? Whatever it is, right? It's just a law of identity. And it's not what it's not, which is the law of non-contradiction. And it's either this or it's not this, which is just what? Law of excluded. So it applies to your thoughts, but it applies just to reality. All right, so back to this right here. Now we're going to get in big trouble. Sitting there, I will. All right, so let's look at, all right, let's think of the two of the most controversial right off the bat. So we can get fired immediately, and hopefully you'll be interested. All right, look. All right, let's write it through Islam. Christianity. All right. Now, most people in our society would want to say what? Again, because radical autonomy, believe whatever you want to believe, do whatever you want to do. Everybody's happy. Everybody's at peace. We can believe whatever you want. You can have your religion. I can have my religion, which is true, right? I mean, we ought to say, all right, if you want to believe that, you can, and not shoot each other. That's a good thing. Remember, that's the old school what? Definition of tolerance. That's good tolerance, right? I don't agree with you. You don't agree with me, but we're going to be peaceable and, go out to eat later and still, agree to disagree. But the new definition, everything, if you want to believe that, that's true for you. And if I want to believe this is true for me. All right, Aristotle would call that what? Aristotle would say it's freaking BS, right? Why? Because he didn't like that? Or why? Why would he say that? Because it's illogical, right? That doesn't make sense philosophically or logically, right? Does that offend you, or is that offensive to some people? Yeah, but here's the thing: what? It doesn't. It's just reality. Again, if I tell you can't fly and you jump off a building, like you may be offended, but I'm sorry, you just can't, because reality, gravity, the laws, they don't care about the sincerity of your belief, right? So let's look at this. Islam. Jesus, or in Islam, it would be this. This is Jesus in Islam, Isa. All right, can anybody read this writing, this crappy handwriting? All right, what does it say? Jesus did not die on a cross. What does Christianity say? What's the problem here? This is in direct violation. This claim is in direct violation of this claim. This claim is what? Is in direct violation of this claim. What is that? Law of non-contradiction. We have a problem here. Why? Right, somebody's wrong. Why? Because we just don't like that, or why? Because logically speaking, philosophically speaking, they can't what? They can't both be right. Right? What did you say? Schrodinger's, yeah. Which, by the way, either Schrodinger's position is true or what? Or it's not true, right? So, law of excluded middle is in violation here. Why? Either he did or he didn't. Either he died or he didn't die on the cross, right? Law of identity. Why? Because we're talking about the same person here, right? You can't say, oh, well, they're talking about this, they're talking about this. Well, we're talking about the same person. Otherwise, we don't have a problem at all. If we're not talking about the same person, then there's no problem, right? Because the subject is gone. We're not talking about the same subject anymore. So right off the bat, one of the most the biggest hot button topics in our culture, when we look at the laws of logic applied to that, somebody's wrong. Now, they could both be wrong, right? Maybe they didn't exist or something like that, which is really not a responsible position to hold, but they could both, logically speaking, be false, right? I mean, they could both be wrong, but they can't possibly both what? They can't possibly both be true. All right, let's look at another one. All right, so let's look at this right here real quick. All right, this is going to represent, for the most part, your pluralistic type faith. Buddhism, Hinduism, and your New Age type faith. These are going to represent your theism or theisms, which is Judaism, Christianity, Islam, right? Now, what is the main tenet of theism? What's the main tenet?
There's a God.
Right, not just a God, because that could be deism, right? What's deism? Deism is that there's a God, but he what?
We cannot know.
He's just hands off, right?
Yeah.
It's like, all right, process has started. 3, 2, 1, go. How about it, right? That's deism. Now, theism is what?
I guess belief in a personal God.
Right, that God interacts with his creation, right? Something like that. Now, these three faiths deny what? This one's kind of whack. This one has a lot of different, it just depends on the one you talk to, but ultimately speaking, the pure form of this, the pure forms deny what?
That there is God.
At least a what? At least a theistic,
Personal.
personal, interacting God, right? In fact, you can be an atheist and hold to this right here, right? Now, personal God, non-personal God, or even no God, atheism. It can be atheistic. All right. Let's start with law of excremental. Either what? Either what? Either there is a personal God or there's not a personal God. Law of non-contradiction. If there is no personal God, then there is what? Not. A personal God, right? Law of identity. Oh, well, when I say God, I mean the universe. Well, over here, we're not talking about what? The universe. You're talking about a personal God. So right now, again, if the pure form of this is true, there is no non-person, or there is no non-personal type God. If that's true, then what has to be false? Judaism has to be false. Why? Because it claims what? A personal type God. Christianity has to be false. Why? Because it claims a personal God, right? Islam has to be false because why? It claims a specific type of personal God, right? Now, if one of these is true, what has to be false? These pure forms of this have to be what? False. Because if a personal God exists, then it can't be true at the same time, in the same sense, in the same way that what? That there's not one. That there's not a personal God, right? You say, look, we're just taking basic principles of thought and applying them to what? Just popular what? Modern American Western what? Sentimentality as it regards what? As it pertains to what? Faith, as it pertains to religious claims, right? All right, so now let's look at this right here. Let's make it hit, or probably give the easiest example. And because we're in the Bible Belt, I'll give the example that most of you guys are probably most familiar with. All right. All right, so Jesus claims he is what? One of the most famous passages in the Bible Belt. That he's what? The way, what? The way, the truth, and life. The way, truth, and life. And then he goes on to say what? Even more radically. In the same breath, he says what? That no one, what? That's right. That no one comes to the Father but through him. But through him. But through Jesus, right? Now, let's overgeneralize here just because I know you guys don't know some of the specifics of it. But let's just attribute this to the Buddha himself. I'm overgeneralizing here just because I know you don't know some of the specifics, but I'm going to say it this way. Buddha says all religions are true. Or in another way, let's say it like this. All would, even though this wouldn't necessarily mean the same thing here, it may be the universe or whatever else. But in other words, all religions get you to what? To God, right? So all religions are true. Law of identity. Now, let's take this route first because this looks to be the most exclusivistic, right? What do I mean when I say exclusive?
That if Christianity is true, or at least that specific type, then all other religions are.
Right, it excludes others, right? It says, this is right, you're wrong. Is that popular in our society?
Yeah.
To say that this is right and you're wrong? No, not popular, right? So if this guy, if the Nazarene carpenter's right, that no one comes to the Father except through him, then what does that mean about this?
That
Look,
all religions are true.
that's not true,
Yeah,
right?
That's not true.
That's not true. He says, no, Buddha, you're not right, right? You're not right. You can say blah, 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 but I am the only way. You're wrong. Now, which comes across as the most pluralistic or most friendly, is the most encompassing or happy, so to speak.
It's good
Right. Why?
because it accepts.
Right, because he says, all right, Nazarene carpenter, you're just closed-minded. I think what? I think what? All right, now here's the problem. This is a big problem, looking at this right here. We're going to look at the laws of logic here, right? That's what our concern is. We're just trying to apply the laws of logic to what? Religious claims. If this is true, all religions are true. If again, we're being oversimplistic here because it's not specifically like that, but this is roughly the claim. So if Buddha says all religions are true, who's wrong? Okay.
And then all religions are not true.
All right. This is just a nice way to say what? This is a nice way to say what?
Absolutely nothing.
Well, no, there's a claim there, but it's a nice way to say what? All religions are true is just a nice way to say what?
All religions are not true.
Right, that you're wrong. Because if this is right, can this be right? That I'm the only way to the Father? If that's right, does this exclude this? Yes. Because if this is right, if all religions are true, then Jesus has to be wrong when he says what? That all religions aren't true. He's saying he's wrong. But he's just saying it what? In a way that sounds what? Nicer. But he's saying the same thing that he's saying. Does that make sense? How? Because if this is right, then he's wrong. Does that make sense? If he's right, then he's wrong. So is this exclusive? Yeah. Because this says, Judaism claims what? It has that what about God? That this is the true God, right? Judaism says what? That they're telling the truth about God, right? What's this say? No, that's not right. Because this is the real truth about God. Islam says what? There's one God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet, right? What does this say? That's not right. Christianity says what? It's right here. Going one way to the Father, right? Jesus. That's his claim. Oh, that's not right. All of them are true. You're wrong too. What is this done? It's just said all these were wrong. But these were supposedly the what religions? These were supposedly the exclusive religions. And this was supposedly what? The accepting religion. But guess what? Here's the thing. Let's just take the mask off. These over here just had the balls, what? To say that they were exclusive. Now, could they all be wrong? Yeah, they could all be wrong, right? And this could be wrong. They could all of them be wrong, right? Atheism could be true, which technically speaking, there still might be something here. They may all be wrong, but they can't what? All be right. Because this excludes this excludes this excludes this excludes this excludes this, and this excludes this, and this excludes this, and this excludes this. This excludes this excludes this excludes this. They're all making exclusive claims, right? One of them just sounds nicer. Just sounds nice to say it this way. All of them are the others. That ultimately speaking, what? You're wrong. Using what? Just three principles of thought. Law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle, law of identity. Now, in our society, look at this mess up here. In our society, can you get elected to a public office saying that?
No.
Probably not, right? Why?
People get hurt.
Well, in our society, you probably can't even hold many positions if you say something like that. But again, what are we concerned with? What's that?
People's feelings.
Yeah, we're concerned with people's feelings, but in this class, what are we concerned about? Or what should we be concerned about? Critical like thinking straight, right? Like thinking, like applying the tools of reality to actual what? Claims of what? Right? Because again, we intrinsically recognize these principles already. Like you came to class knowing this, right? I didn't have to tell you any of these things. We're just kind of basically like, look, we pull back the cover, so to speak, to look what you already hold to, law of excluded middle, law of non-contradiction, law of identity, those things. But we need to look at those in light of what? Religious claims too. Why? Because these always what? Get off the hook, right? All of a sudden when we talk about spirituality or whatever else, we think we can just start talking what? Nonsense, right? It's nonsense. That's nonsense. Now, here's the thing, too. Here's a challenge I'm going to toss out at you. Who believes that what the decisions you make in life should make this? Who thinks that? They should make sense, right? Like you shouldn't say, I'm going to do the most nonsensical thing I can possibly do today in regards to my job. Why? How long would you hold your job? Probably not long, right? Or think of it this way. What if you have a child? Today I'm going to do the most nonsensical thing I can do in regards to my kid today. Man, I would punch you in the face if I heard you say that about your kid, right? Because your kid may end up dead, right? If you try to apply something like that to your child, right? But what you're banking your eternity on, all of a sudden you think it's okay to do what? Nonsense. Oh, you can believe that, and I can believe this. Well, all right, if one of you's right and one of you's wrong, then you're literally telling the other person that their what hangs in the balance?
Eternity.
Their eternity. So in atheism, your eternity is what? Nothing, right? You know, you live, you die, and it's done. But you're still banking that what's true? That's true, right? Right, that's what you think eternity just is just your non-existence. You're banking your eternity on the truth claim, what? That just nothing happens, that you're just dead, that's it. If you're a Christian, you're banking your eternity on what? That Jesus what? Rose from the dead. You're banking your eternity on that, right? That truth claim, that's a truth claim, right? Now, if you're a Muslim, you're banking your eternity on what? That he didn't, so there's a what? A different what? A different way. You're banking your eternity on that claim, right? You could just go on and on with those. But the point is they can't possibly all what? Be true. And so on some of the most important questions about life, we resort to what? That's scary, right? In fact, that's crazy. I mean, is nonsense not just another word to say crazy? Right? That's just nuts. Now, who would have thought that these fundamental principles, who would have thought those applied to probably what has your heart pounding in your chest right now, right? That's why this is relevant, right? This class is relevant. Because again, whatever you do, religious claims, familial claims, cultural claims, whatever your worldview is, you're doing what? You're using these, you're depending on these. And so what is probably the most wise thing that we can do if we're going to talk and try to live a life here on earth? It's probably good that we do what? Become familiar with these, right? And then what were you saying?
Apply the law of logic, so like whatever we do,
Right.
like,
Right, and try to look at reality through the lens of what? Right, to think straight, right? Because do you want to just think straight in philosophy class? If this is the only place you think straight, then you've lost it. You see what I'm saying? Like you've lost it, right? When you go to your math class, should you think straight? Or college algebra or whatever it is you take here. You should think straight, right? You should think straight when you get in the car, right? And you start to drive. Oh, when I push the gas pedal, it's the same as pushing the brake. No, the gas pedal is the law of identity. When you push the gas, you either go or you don't go, law of the middle. You're either pushing the gas pedal or you're not pushing the gas pedal, but you can't be pushing it and not pushing it at the same time in the same way, in the same sense. Logical or law of non-contradiction, right? See what I'm saying? Everything you do revolves around those principles, all of it, right? And so the big questions, it's just as applicable. Which one do Yankees say? We'll say Yankees say one. Yankees say applicable, and Southerners say applicable. Or is it vice versa? Southerners say applicable. Or did I just say that? Hey, let's go to the Caribbean. All right, so look. All of these apply to the biggest client. These apply, right? So when you go home, you're like, yeah, I thought that, philosophy class, blah, blah, blah. I didn't realize it would relate to me just as much as my, health class or whatever, right? I didn't know it would relate to me just as much as my whatever else class. Right? This stuff relates, or at least it ought to, right? It should relate. All right, so we'll let this be kind of the intro to our logic stuff, and then I'll let you guys go. Because the next phase of our little, again, and we don't have any reading this week because, for whatever reason, our book just decides to not even mention logic, which is odd in a intro to philosophy class. But logic is just the tools of how we think. We've already been doing that, right? We've already been talking about law, all these basic principles. Now, logic it's just ordered thinking. That's all logic is. Logic is just ordered thinking. So you're using these principles, again, when you live your life. Now, what is logic? Logic just is that. That's just what logic is. It's just you using these things. The question is, are you going to use them rightly or what? Right? You're either going to use them the right way or you're going to use them the wrong way. Now, is it possible that you're not using logic right now? How so? You're staring off his face. Think about it. When you get up, how am I going to word this? There's two ways to say it. I don't want to get us in trouble. But when you wipe after you use the bathroom, right? It's like, you go in the bathroom and you're like, all right. You wipe after you use the bathroom, right? Why do you do that? You didn't realize it, but what'd you do? You use logic. How? How'd you use logic? What's that? Well, not just that you were taught that. I bet even if you weren't taught that, you'd probably still do that. Why? Because you ordered your thoughts, right? I won't say it. X makes me dirty. White makes me clean. I want to be clean. Therefore, I will wipe after X, right? Now, that's what's called a syllogism. That's called a syllogism. This is just a premise and a conclusion, or two premises and a conclusion. It's a logical syllogism. Now, when we said that about using the can or whatever, did you construct a syllogism in your mind that you knew about? Now, you didn't know that you did it, right? But you did it. You used a syllogism. See what I'm saying? Your brain, your mind is going to do this, whether you know it or not. Again, are we inventing this? Did Aristotle invent it? No. You see what I'm saying? How the brilliance of discovering this stuff? Or for instance, let's say that you're hungry. When you're hungry and you went to your refrigerator, what did you do? You had a certain conclusion in mind, wasn't it? To solve hunger. Whether you knew it or not, your brain, your mind, you constructed a syllogism. I'm hungry. People that go to the refrigerator to eat food satisfy their hunger. Therefore, if I go to the refrigerator and eat food, it will satisfy my hunger. Therefore, I won't be hungry. Now, did you literally go through that syllogism in your mind when you were going to do that? Like, did you sit down and write out two premises and a conclusion? No. But what happened? You did it anyway. You can't not do this. You can't not do this. Why? It's just the way reality works. You're going to use logic. You're going to make syllogisms in your mind. You're going to construct arguments in your mind. The question is not if you're going to use this. The question is what? Whether you're going to be bad. The question is what? Whether you're going to be good at it or what? Bad at it. You're going bad at it. Somebody make an album. When do you guys become famous? Make an album called Bad at It. One word, bad at it. All right, look. You're going to do this stuff, right? You're going to be good at making arguments or bad at making arguments. You already do it. Again, when you go to the John, when you get up to go to the refrigerator to get something to eat, when you leave at a certain time of day to get here by a certain time of day, when you pick up, when you go to the grocery store and you pick up something that's 8 pounds of, grits, and something else that's 3 pounds of grits, and so you compare the prices to see which one you're getting more for the money on, right? Like, you're doing that. You're using all of this. You don't realize it. So the question is not if you're going to use it. Well, I'll just be a person that bothers with logic, or I'll be a person that doesn't bother with it. You don't have that option, do you? You're already doing it. So the question is what? Are you going to be able to do it effectively in a good way, or are you going to be crappy at it, right, and do it in a bad way? That's really your only option. Somebody tell me right now, why is that your only option? We just said it. Why is that your only option? And why do you not have a choice? Because what? Right. We just made that way. That's how your mind works. That's how your brain works. That's how you are. You're doing it. You're already doing it. You don't have a choice. Why? Because you're already doing it. You can't just one day say, I'm going to live completely illogically. One, that itself was some sort of argument, right? You did that. But then if you try to do it, I mean, what does that even look like? What does that even mean? What does that mean? You're either going to be good at it, you're going to be bad at it. All right, so real quick, so we can get into super fast this. Syllogism, deductive syllogism. We're not going to screw with that. We'll do that next time. Any questions before we go? Anything you want to say? Oh, if you didn't turn in your paper, remember I got them for most of you guys. Because it's the first week. If you didn't turn it in, you can have it till you got till tonight to turn it in.